They called me a useless wife and threw me out of my own company party. Little did they know, I held the $17 million key to their destruction, and I just turned the lock. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. I stood in the center of the ballroom, my emerald silk dress catching the light of 1,000 crystal prisms, and realized my life was a lie. The verdict hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. My husband of 23 years was standing 20 feet away, laughing with a group of investors, and he hadn't looked at me once in 2 hours. I adjusted the velvet gift box in my clutch, the platinum bracelet inside feeling heavier than a lead weight. 23 years of loyalty, and I was being erased in real time. I moved toward the bar, my heels clicking sharply against the marble, trying to maintain the composure I'd spent decades perfecting. "Is that her?" a voice whispered from behind a towering floral arrangement. "Yes," another replied, the malice in the tone unmistakable. "The frigid wife. Robert says she's more of a business liability than a partner these days. Poor thing has no idea about Vanessa." The air in the room suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out by the sheer force of their pity. My hand gripped the edge of the mahogany bar so hard my knuckles turned white. Vanessa. The 20-something assistant with the ambitious eyes and the scarlet dress. I looked toward the stage and saw her now, sliding into the space right beside Robert, her hand grazing his arm with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. Robert didn't pull away. He leaned in. I turned to the bartender, my voice steady, despite the hammer of my heart against my ribs. "Double scotch." "Neat." "Rough night, Mrs. Sterling?" the young man asked, sliding the glass toward me. "The longest of my life," I said, taking a swallow that burned all the way down. I looked at the crowd, the city's most influential leaders, people I had hosted at my own dinner table, people whose contracts I had reviewed at 3 a.m. while Robert slept. They were all watching. Some turned away when I made eye contact. Others gave me forced, tight-lipped smiles that felt like insults. I wasn't the co-owner of Sterling Enterprises tonight. I was a discarded prop in Robert's coronation. I set the glass down and began walking toward the stage. I needed to see his face. I needed to see if the man I had built an empire with still existed somewhere behind that custom-tailored tuxedo. As I approached the circle of executives, the men seemed to close ranks. They shifted their shoulders, forming a human wall between me and my husband. Robert was deep into a story about overseas expansion, his silver hair perfectly styled, his voice booming with the confidence I had helped him build. "Robert," I said softly, reaching out to touch his elbow. He turned, and for a split second I saw it. Not love, not a welcome greeting. It was a flash of pure, cold annoyance. It disappeared as quickly as a lightning strike, replaced by the polite, distant smile he gave to persistent salespeople. "Oh, Margaret, you're here," he said. His tone was flat, lacking the warmth he had used just moments ago with a stranger. "Of course I'm here." I managed a small, pained laugh. "This is our big night, remember?" One of the investors cleared his throat and looked at his watch. Another muttered an excuse about finding his wife. The circle vanished, leaving us standing in an island of uncomfortable silence. "I should get back to networking," Robert said, already looking past me. "These deals won't close themselves." He walked away without a kiss, without an introduction, without even a glance back. I stood there, the emerald silk of my dress feeling like a shroud. Then I heard it again, louder this time. "There's the useless wife who can't satisfy him." I turned, my face burning, but the sea of guests shifted, hiding the speaker. Then Vanessa appeared. She moved like a predator, her scarlet dress a vivid stain against the gold and white decor. She stopped inches from me, her perfume sickly sweet. "Hello, Margaret," she said, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. I think there's been a misunderstanding about tonight. This party is for key stakeholders only. I am a key stakeholder, I replied, my voice finding a sudden hard edge. I own 17% of this company. Had, she corrected with a look of mock sympathy. Past tense, darling. Robert's been meaning to discuss some changes with you. But for now, you're making the guests uncomfortable. Before I could breathe, 2 security guards appeared at my sides. They were men I had known for years, men who usually tipped their hats to me at the entrance. Now, they looked through me. Security, remove this woman, Vanessa announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom. The room went silent. The music seemed to stop. Every eye in the building was on me as the guards took my arms. I looked at Robert, desperate for him to intervene, but he had turned his back to me again, engrossed in a discussion about quarterly projections. He knew. He was letting this happen. As they led me toward the revolving doors, the world I had spent 23 years building shattered into a million sharp pieces. I stepped out onto the cold pavement, the night air biting at my skin. The valet avoided my eyes, suddenly very interested in his clipboard. I walked toward the parking garage, my heels echoing like gunshots in the stillness. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat, the silence of the Tesla absolute. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't grip the steering wheel. I looked down at the velvet box in my lap and threw it into the passenger footwell. Then I reached for my phone. The grief was still there, a heavy, suffocating weight, but beneath it, something else was flickering to life. A cold, clinical rage. I scrolled through my contacts until I found David Chen, my financial advisor. It was nearly 11 on a Friday night, but I didn't care. He answered on the 4th ring. Margaret, is everything okay? David, I need you to execute some transactions first thing Monday morning, I said, my voice sounding like someone else's. Someone stronger. What's the urgency? I want to liquidate my stake in Sterling Enterprises, I said, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. All $17 million worth. And David? Freeze every joint account and credit card I share with Robert. Shut it all down. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Margaret, that's a massive decision. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. I hung up and started the engine. As I pulled out of the garage, my phone began to buzz. It was Robert. I watched his photo fill the screen, a picture from last Christmas where he looked so happy. I declined the call. He called again, and again. By the time I reached the main road, the missed call counter hit 10. He thought he had removed a useless wife. He was about to find out he had removed the foundation of his entire world. The house was silent when I walked through the door, the kind of silence that feels heavy and permanent. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. I knew every inch of this place because I was the one who had chosen every piece of furniture, every rug, and every painting, while Robert was busy building his image. I walked straight to my home office and sat behind the mahogany desk. My phone was still buzzing incessantly in my purse. I pulled it out and watched the notifications scroll by. Text from Robert, text from his head of PR, even a text from Vanessa, disguised as a check-in. I ignored them all. I had work to do. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder. It contained the original incorporation papers from 1998. My signature was right there next to Robert's. I wasn't just his wife. I was the primary investor. I was the one who had taken my grandmother's inheritance and put it into a struggling attorney's dream when no bank would look at him. I spent the next 4 hours scanning every document. I found the loan guarantee from 2001, $3 million, secured by my personal assets, not his. I found the records of the 2008 recession when I had taken a second mortgage on our home to cover the company payroll, so his employees wouldn't lose their houses. Robert had conveniently forgotten all of it. The corporate biography on the website now listed him as the sole visionary founder. Around 3 a.m., I drafted a clinical, precise email to the board of directors. I didn't mention the affair. I didn't mention the humiliation at the party. I simply informed them that as a 17% shareholder and co-founder, I was exercising my right to liquidate my holdings and terminate all joint financial obligations, effective immediately. I hit send and watched the little icon spin. Once it disappeared, I felt a strange, light sensation in my chest. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't carrying Robert's weight. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when the first real explosion happened. My phone didn't just buzz, it screamed. Robert was calling from his car. I finally picked up. "What the hell have you done, Margaret?" His voice was distorted by rage and panic. "I'm doing exactly what you wanted, Robert," I said, leaning back in my chair and watching the birds gather on the lawn. "I'm removing the useless wife from your equation. You can't liquidate that stake. The stock is already tanking in pre-market trading. You're going to trigger a margin call on the expansion loans." "I know," I said. "I reviewed those loan documents myself, remember? I'm the one who negotiated the terms. You should have checked the covenants before you had me thrown out of the party." "Margaret, listen to me." His voice dropped, trying to find that old manipulative warmth. "We were both stressed last night. It was a big night, and things got out of hand. Let's just sit down and talk this through. We can fix the accounts. I'll tell Vanessa to stay away." "Vanessa isn't the problem, Robert. You are. You forgot who built that chair you're sitting in. You forgot whose money bought the tuxedo you were wearing. And now you're going to remember." I hung up before he could respond. 10 seconds later, my sister Sarah called. "Margaret, Robert just called me crying. He says you've lost your mind. What is going on?" "I found my mind, Sarah," I told her. "Did you know he was having an affair? Did you know he had security throw me out of the company party in front of the mayor?" The silence on the other end was telling. "You knew," I said, the realization cutting deeper than the betrayal itself. "Margaret, honey, it's complicated. Men like Robert, they have needs, but he loves you. He's the provider. You can't just destroy his life over a mistake. He didn't provide this life, Sarah. I did. And if you're on his side, don't call this number again." I blocked her too. The circle was getting smaller, and for the first time, I didn't mind. I made a pot of coffee and returned to my desk. I had an appointment with a divorce attorney at 10 a.m., and I needed to be ready. I opened my laptop and saw the news alert starting to pop up. Sterling Enterprises share price drops 4%. Rumors of internal power struggle. I watched the numbers tick down. Every cent dropped was a piece of the empire I was dismantling. At 9:30 a.m., there was a frantic pounding at my front door. I checked the security camera. It was Robert, looking disheveled, his silver hair a mess, his tie hanging loose. He looked like the struggling attorney I had met 23 years ago, only without the soul. I didn't open the door. I grabbed my purse and went out through the garage. As I backed the Tesla out, he ran toward the car, slamming his fist against the window. "Margaret, open the door. You're destroying everything. The board is calling an emergency session. They're going to oust me." I rolled down the window just an inch. "Then I suggest you get to that meeting, Robert. You've got a lot of explaining to do. Oh, and by the way, I canceled the trip to Tuscany, and the villa, and the private jet. I hope Vanessa likes staycations." I drove away, leaving him standing in the driveway of the house he could no longer afford to maintain. The attorney's office was located in a glass tower downtown, overlooking the financial district. Rebecca Martinez was a legend in matrimonial law, sharp, clinical, and notoriously expensive. She looked at the stack of documents I had brought and whistled. "You've been very busy, Mrs. Sterling." "It's Miss Hartford now," I corrected. "And I'm not just looking for a divorce, Rebecca. I'm looking for restitution." "Well, based on these incorporation papers and the loan guarantees, you don't just want half. You have a claim to nearly 70% of the marital estate, based on initial capital contributions and personal liability." "I want it all," I said. "I want the house, the city apartment, and the remaining shares. He can keep Vanessa and the debts." "He's going to fight you," Rebecca warned. "He'll claim you're acting out of spite, that you're emotionally unstable." "Let him," I said. "I have 23 years of receipts that say otherwise." As I left the office, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, thinking it might be a reporter. "Margaret?" "It's Vanessa." I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "You have a lot of nerve calling me." "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Robert is losing it. He's in the office screaming at everyone. The board is meeting in an hour and they're talking about a forced buyout. If the company goes under, I lose my job. I have bills, Margaret. I didn't know he was going to treat you like that." "You were the one who ordered security to remove me, Vanessa. You enjoyed it." "He told me to. He said you were a distraction. Look, if you stop the liquidation, I'll give you everything. I have emails. I have photos of us together. I can help your divorce case." "I don't need your help, Vanessa. I already have the truth. And as for your job, I'd start updating your resume. Sterling Enterprises is about to undergo a very painful restructuring." I hung up and headed toward the company headquarters. The board meeting was at noon. They hadn't invited me, but they had forgotten one thing. I still had my key card, and I still knew the back elevator code. I walked into the lobby, my head held high. The receptionist, a girl who had always been sweet to me, looked up and gasped, "Mrs. Sterling, you can't be here. Mr. Sterling said—" "Mr. Sterling doesn't own this building today," I said, walking past the security desk. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like a countdown. When the doors opened, the hallway was a hive of activity. Executives were running between offices with panicked expressions. I walked straight to the boardroom doors and pushed them open. The room went dead silent. Robert was at the head of the table, surrounded by the board members I had seen the night before. "Margaret?" Robert gasped, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "You can't be in here. This is a private session." "Actually," I said, taking a seat at the far end of the table, "as the co-founder and the person currently holding the keys to your liquidity, I think I'm exactly where I need to be." I opened my folder and slid a single piece of paper across the polished wood. "That," I said, "is a list of the personal assets I'm withdrawing from the company's collateral pool by the end of business today. Unless you can find $27 million in the next 4 hours, this company is insolvent." Robert looked at the board, his eyes wide with desperation. "She's bluffing. She wouldn't destroy her own investment." "It's not an investment anymore, Robert," I said. "It's a lesson." One of the board members, a man named James who had known us since the beginning, leaned forward. "Margaret, what do you want?" "I want Robert's resignation," I said, "and I want a seat as the chair of the board. If you agree, I'll stop the liquidation and personally bridge the expansion loan. If not, well, I hope you all have good resumes." Robert stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "You bitch, you're trying to steal my company." "I'm not stealing it, Robert," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm reclaiming it." The silence in the boardroom was thick enough to choke on. Robert remained standing, his chest heaving, his face a mottled purple. The board members were looking at their hands, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the man who had been their golden boy for 15 years. "You can't do this," Robert hissed, his voice trembling. "The bylaws." "The bylaws," I interrupted, "were drafted by my family's legal firm in 1998. Section 4. Paragraph B clearly states that in the event of a significant capital withdrawal by a founding partner, the board must enter a period of emergency restructuring. I am the founding partner, Robert, and I am withdrawing." James, the senior board member, cleared his throat. "Robert, sit down." "James, you're not seriously considering this?" Robert's voice went high and thin. "We're considering the survival of this firm," James said, his voice cold. "The stock is down 12% since the opening bell. The banks are calling. We don't have time for a domestic dispute." He turned to me. "Margaret, if we accept your terms, how quickly can you stabilize the credit line?" "The wire is ready," I said. "As soon as I have the signed resignation and the board resolution appointing me as interim chair, $27 million moves into the corporate treasury. The liquidation stops. The market sees a unified leadership, and the price recovers." "And what about me?" Robert asked, sounding suddenly small. "You?" I looked at him with a pity that felt honest. "You can go home?" "Oh, wait, you can't. The house is titled in my name. I bought it with my grandmother's estate, remember? You can go to the apartment. I'll give you 48 hours to get your things." Robert looked around the table, searching for an ally. He found none. He had spent years treating these people like underlings, taking all the credit for their hard work. Now they were returning the favor. "Sign the papers, Robert," James said, "before we have to involve the SEC in a deeper audit of your recent discretionary spending." That hit home. Robert's eyes flicked toward the door, where Vanessa was likely waiting. He knew about the audits. He knew I had found the charges for the jewelry, the hotel rooms, and the business trips to the Maldives. He took the pen with a shaking hand. He signed the resignation. He signed the transfer of authority. Then he threw the pen at me. "You'll regret this, Margaret. You're a housewife. You don't know how to run a billion-dollar enterprise. You'll be begging me to come back within a month." "I was running this company while you were still trying to figure out how to tie your own shoes, Robert," I said, gathering the signed documents. "Now, please. Security is waiting to escort you out. I believe you're familiar with the procedure." I watched him walk out, the same way I had walked out the night before. Only he didn't have my dignity. He didn't have my vision. He just had a cardboard box and a mistress who was currently looking for a way to distance herself from a sinking ship. Once the door closed, I turned to the board. "Gentlemen, Patricia, we have 4 hours before the market closes. Let's get to work." The next week was a blur of 18-hour days. I moved into the CEO's office, but I didn't keep the furniture. I had the massive, ego-driven desk removed and replaced with a functional conference table. I fired the PR firm that had been helping Robert hide his tracks. And I fired Vanessa. She came to my office on Thursday, her eyes red-rimmed, her designer suit looking wrinkled. "You can't fire me," she said, trying to summon her old bravado. "I have an employment contract." "A contract that has a very clear morality clause," I said, not looking up from the spreadsheet I was reviewing. "Engaging in a relationship with the CEO while misusing company funds for personal travel. That's cause, Vanessa. You're lucky I'm not suing you for the return of the $400,000 Robert spent on you over the last year." Her face went pale. I didn't know it was company money. He said it was his. "Ignorance isn't a legal defense. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk. And Vanessa, if you ever contact my husband again, I'll make sure that audit becomes public record." She fled. I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I just felt a sense of order. That night, I went home to the big empty house. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt quiet. I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, looking out at the garden. Robert had always hated the garden, said it was a waste of money. But I loved the roses. I loved the way the soil felt under my fingernails. My phone rang. It was my daughter Chloe, who was away at grad school in London. Mom, I just saw the news. What's happening? Is Dad really out? He is, honey, I said, my voice softening. I'm so sorry you had to find out through a news alert. Don't be sorry, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. About time. I've seen how he treats you, Mom. I've seen how hard you work. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, Chloe. I'm free. Good. Because I always thought the company should have been named Hartford Enterprises anyway. Sterling sounds like a cheap watch. We talked for an hour, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to check the clock to see if Robert needed something. I didn't have to monitor my tone. I could just be Margaret. The following Monday, the stock price stabilized. The market loved the return of the founder narrative. I was featured on the cover of a major business magazine under the headline, "The Woman Behind the Empire Takes the Lead." But the battle wasn't over. Robert wasn't going to go away quietly. 2 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit. He was suing for wrongful termination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and he was demanding a 50% split of the $17 million stake I had liquidated. He was also claiming that I had coerced him into signing the resignation under duress. I called Rebecca Martinez. He's doing it. Of course he is, she said. He's desperate. He's already burned through his cash reserves trying to maintain his lifestyle. I heard he's living in a 2-bedroom rental and driving a leased BMW. What's our move? We don't move, Rebecca said. We wait. I've been doing some digging, Margaret. Robert wasn't just spending company money on Vanessa. He was involved in a private equity scheme that was funneling capital out of Sterling Enterprises into a shell company in the Caymans. He wasn't just cheating on you. He was stealing from the firm. My stomach turned. Are you sure? I have the wire transfers. He was planning to leave you, Margaret. He was building a nest egg to take with him once the divorce was finalized. He just didn't expect you to move first. I sat in the dark of my office, the city lights twinkling outside. I had thought it was just a matter of a bruised ego and a midlife crisis, but it was much worse. He had been systematic. He had been cold. He hadn't just called me a useless wife. He had treated me like a mark. I looked at the file Rebecca had sent. The shell company was named M. Hartford Holdings. He had even used my maiden name to hide the theft. The irony was a jagged blade in my heart. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, sounding smug. Changed your mind, Margaret? Ready to settle? I'm looking at a file, Robert, I said, my voice like ice. M. Hartford Holdings. Does that ring a bell? The silence on the other end was absolute. I could hear his breathing, heavy and panicked. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally stammered. I think you do. And I think the SEC would be very interested in why $5 million of corporate capital ended up in a Cayman account under that name. You have 1 hour to withdraw your lawsuit and sign a full waiver of all claims to the marital estate. Or my next call is to the federal prosecutor. Margaret, wait. 59 minutes, Robert. The clock is ticking. I sat in my office, watching the second hand of the wall clock sweep away the minutes. My heart wasn't racing. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The man I had loved for 2 decades had been a ghost, a construct of my own loyalty. The person on the other end of that phone was a stranger, a common thief who happened to share my bed for 23 years. The phone on my desk buzzed at exactly the 40-minute mark. It wasn't Robert. It was his lawyer, a man named Henderson, who had always been a little too slick for my liking. Margaret, it's Bill Henderson. I have Robert here in my office. We've reviewed your concerns. They aren't concerns, Bill. They're evidence, I said. Did Robert tell you about the Caymans, or did he leave that out of your retainer agreement? I heard a muffled argument in the background, a sharp, "Shut up, Robert," from Henderson. We believe there may have been some accounting irregularities, Henderson said, his voice straining to remain professional. But a full waiver of the marital estate is an extreme demand. We're prepared to offer a 20% settlement and the withdrawal of the lawsuit. The offer is zero, Bill, I said. He takes the apartment and his personal effects. That's it. In exchange, I don't hand over the wire transfers. He avoids prison. That's a very generous exchange for a man who's been embezzling from his own company. You can't prove intent. Robert's voice screamed from the background. I have your digital signature on the transfer authorizations, Robert, I said, speaking loud enough for him to hear. I have the emails to the Cayman Bank from your private server, and I have Vanessa's testimony. She's remarkably talkative when she thinks she's going to be an accessory to a felony. That was a lie. I hadn't talked to Vanessa about the Caymans, but it worked. The line went silent again. Give us 10 minutes, Henderson said. I hung up and looked out the window. Below me, the city was moving. Thousands of people going about their lives, unaware of the corporate execution happening on the 41st floor. I thought about the night Robert proposed. We were on a beach in Malibu. He had nothing then but a law degree and a pile of student debt. He had looked at me with such intensity and promised me the world. He had kept that promise in a way. He had built the world, but he had built it on a foundation of rot. The phone rang again. We accept, Henderson said. The smugness was gone. He sounded like a man who was already thinking about how to distance himself from his client. The paperwork will be at your attorney's office by 5 p.m. Good choice, Bill, I said. And tell Robert, don't bother coming for the rest of his things. I've already had them delivered to your office. I put the phone down and exhaled. It was over. The legal battle, the financial threat, the shadow of his betrayal. I was the sole owner of the house, the primary shareholder of the company, and I was a single woman. But I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt tired. I spent the rest of the day in meetings, but they were different now. The staff looked at me with a new kind of respect, the kind that comes from seeing a leader survive a coup. We planned the new product launch. We discussed the expansion into the European market. For the first time, the ideas were coming from the bottom up, not the top down. When I finally left the building at 8 p.m., the lobby was empty. I walked to my car, the evening air feeling cool and fresh. As I pulled out onto the street, I saw a familiar figure standing on the corner near a bus stop. It was Robert. He was holding a small cardboard box. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The custom tuxedo was gone, replaced by a cheap suit that didn't fit him right. He was waiting for a ride, or maybe just waiting for the reality of his situation to sink in. I could have stopped. I could have rolled down the window and said something cutting. I could have enjoyed the sight of his fall, but I didn't. I just kept driving. He didn't even see me. He was looking at his phone, probably checking his balance, or waiting for a call from a mistress who would never answer. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The sun was streaming into the bedroom. I didn't feel the usual knot of anxiety in my stomach, the need to prepare for Robert's moods. I got up, made a cup of coffee, and went out to the garden. The roses were in full bloom. I spent 2 hours pruning them, the sun warm on my back. My hands were covered in dirt, And I didn't care. I felt grounded. My phone buzzed on the garden table. It was a text from David Chen. Stock opened up another 3%. The board is thrilled. You did it, Margaret. I smiled and put the phone back down. I hadn't just saved the company. I had saved myself. A few weeks later, I was at a charity gala. It was the same ballroom where the nightmare had begun. I was wearing a new dress, not green this time, but a deep, powerful midnight blue. I walked in alone, and I didn't feel invisible. People flocked to me. The mayor, the bank president, the tech moguls. They didn't talk to me as Mrs. Robert Sterling. They talked to me as Margaret Hartford, the CEO. Margaret, Patricia Hoffman said, gliding over with a glass of champagne. You look radiant, truly. We were all so shocked by everything, but you've handled it with such grace. Thank you, Patricia, I said, meeting her eyes. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're no longer carrying dead weight. Her smile flickered just for a second. She knew. They all knew. As I moved through the room, I saw Janet Morrison near the chocolate fountain. She saw me and immediately tried to turn away, but I walked right up to her. Hello, Janet, I said. Oh, Margaret, hello. We were just saying how brave you are. I'm not brave, Janet, I said. I'm just awake. And by the way, if you're still feeling sorry for me, don't. I'm the one who kept the empire. Robert is the one living in a rental in the suburbs. I left her gaping and walked toward the stage. It was time for the keynote speech. I'd been asked to talk about resilience and leadership. I stood behind the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the whispers, but they weren't about my failure. They were about my power. 23 years ago, I began, my voice clear and steady. I was told that my role was to be the support system, to be the silent partner, to be the woman behind the man, and for a long time, I believed that was enough. I believed my worth was measured by how well I served someone else's dream. I paused, looking at the spot where I had stood when security had removed me. But I learned that when you allow yourself to be invisible, you give people permission to treat you as if you don't exist. I learned that loyalty without respect is just a prison. And most importantly, I learned that the person who built the world is the only one who truly knows how it works. The room was silent. I could feel the weight of their attention. So to anyone here who's been told they are useless or just a distraction, I have a message. Don't wait for them to see you. Make it impossible for them to ignore you. Take your stake, take your money, and most importantly, take your power back. The applause started slowly, then grew into a roar. I stepped down from the stage, my heart light. As I walked toward the exit, a young woman stopped me. She was maybe 25, with bright, intelligent eyes. Ms. Hartford, I'm an associate at a firm downtown. I just wanted to say, thank you. I was thinking about quitting because my boss takes credit for all my work. But after hearing you, I think I'm going to go in tomorrow and demand a partnership. I smiled and squeezed her hand. Don't just demand it, dear. Document it. And if he says no, start your own firm. I walked out into the night, the city lights feeling like a celebration. I got into my car and drove home. The house was waiting for me, lit up and warm. I walked through the hallway, past the spots where the wedding photos used to be. The walls were empty now, but I had plans for them. I was going to fill them with my own photos. Photos of my travels, photos of my daughter, photos of my life. I went to my office and sat at my table. I opened a new file. It wasn't about Sterling Enterprises. It was about Hartford Ventures. I was going to start an investment fund for women entrepreneurs. I was going to use my $17 million to make sure no other woman had to be a silent partner. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I saw the speech. You win, Margaret. I hope you're happy. It was Robert. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel regret. I just felt a sense of finality. I deleted the message without responding. I looked at the clock. It was late, but I wasn't tired. I had a whole new world to build, and this time, my name was going to be on the front door. The transition from the wife to the boss was a metamorphosis that required every bit of the strength I had gathered over 23 years of silence. I spent the next 6 months dismantling the culture of ego that Robert had established at Sterling Enterprises. I promoted 3 women to senior executive positions, women who had been doing the work for a decade, while men with louder voices took the bonuses. The air in the building changed. It went from a place of fear and hierarchy to one of genuine collaboration. I was sitting in my office on a Tuesday afternoon when my assistant, a bright young man named Marcus, buzzed in. Ms. Hartford, your sister Sarah is in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. Sarah hadn't spoken to me since I blocked her months ago. I had heard through the family grapevine that she was struggling with the fact that her successful brother-in-law was now a social pariah. Send her up, Marcus. A few minutes later, Sarah walked in. She looked older, the lines of worry etched deep around her mouth. She didn't look like the woman who had air-kissed my cheeks at the company party. Margaret, she said, her voice hesitant. Sarah, have a seat. She sat on the edge of the leather chair, clutching her purse. I saw the article in the Times about the new investment fund. It's wonderful. Is that why you're here, Sarah? To congratulate me? She looked down at her hands. Robert is in trouble, Margaret. Real trouble. He's being audited by the IRS. They're looking into the offshore accounts Henderson told you about. Says if he can just pay the back taxes. The criminal charges might be dropped. He told me to talk to you. He said you have a moral obligation because you took the company from him. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. A moral obligation? He embezzled millions from a company I funded. He cheated on me in public. He had security throw me out of a building I co-founded. And he thinks I owe him? Margaret, he's family. Or he was. You can't just let him rot. Watch me, Sarah, I said, leaning forward. Robert made his choices. He built a life on deception and theft. I'm not his savior. I'm the person who finally held him accountable. And as for you, if you want to throw your savings down a black hole, that's your business. No, don't you dare come into my office and talk to me about morality. Sarah stood up, her face flushing red. You've changed. You've become cold, Margaret, just like him. No, Sarah, I've become honest. There's a difference. Now I have a board meeting. Please show yourself out. As she left, I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was fleeting. I was learning that reclaiming your life often meant losing people who preferred the old, compliant version of you. I turned my attention back to the screen. I was reviewing the first round of applicants for the Hartford Ventures grant. One stood out. A small tech startup founded by 2 women who were developing an AI-driven platform for sustainable supply chains. They were brilliant. They had a solid prototype. But every venture capital firm they had approached had told them they were too early or lacked experience. I remembered being that too early person. I remembered the closed doors. I picked up the phone. Marcus, get the founders of Gaiatech on the line. I want to meet them tomorrow morning. The meeting with the founders, Maya and Elena, was the highlight of my month. They were nervous, but their passion was infectious. As they walked me through the projections, I saw the same fire I used to see in the mirror. We know we're asking for a lot, Maya said, her voice steady, but we believe this can change the way manufacturing impacts the environment. I don't care about the ask, I said. I care about the execution. I'm going to fund the entire seed round, but I want a 20% stake and a seat on your advisory board. I don't just want to give you money. I want to make sure you don't make the same mistakes I did. Elena's eyes welled up with tears. Thank you, Ms. Hartford. You have no idea what this means to us. I think I do, I said. Now, let's get to work on your legal structure. I have a very good lawyer named Rebecca you should meet. Life was becoming a series of these moments, building things that mattered, supporting people who deserved it. I was traveling more, not for Robert's client dinners, but for my own conferences. I was speaking at universities, telling my story to young women who were just starting their careers. One evening, I was in a hotel room in San Francisco after a keynote speech. I was tired but satisfied. My phone buzzed. It was an email from a private investigator I had hired months ago to keep an eye on the Cayman situation, just in case Robert tried to hide more assets. The email contained a link to a news story from a local paper in Florida. Former CEO Robert Sterling arrested on charges of tax evasion and wire fraud. I clicked the link. There was a mugshot. Robert looked haggard, his skin sallow, his eyes vacant. He had been caught trying to liquidate a second hidden account in Sarasota. Vanessa was mentioned in the article, too. She had apparently turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity. I sat on the edge of the bed, the blue light of the phone illuminating the dark room. I felt a sense of closure, but not the joy I had expected. It was just a quiet, heavy fact. The story of Robert and Margaret was finally over. The useless wife had outlasted the visionary founder. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The San Francisco skyline was a glittering carpet of light. I thought about the 56 calls I had received that night at the party. I thought about the emerald dress. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet box I had bought for myself a few weeks ago. Inside was a platinum bracelet. It wasn't engraved with the coordinates of Malibu. It was engraved with a single word: sovereign. I snapped it onto my wrist and looked at my reflection in the glass. I was 52 years old, and my life was just beginning. I had the money, I had the company, but more importantly, I had the truth. I walked to the desk and picked up my pen. I had a new project to outline. It was a book, not a business manual, but a memoir. I wanted to call it The Cost of Silence. As I started to write the first lines, I realized I wasn't writing for myself anymore. I was writing for every woman who was currently sitting at a lavish party, listening to whispers and wondering if she had the strength to leave. I wanted them to know that the panic on the other side, it really is priceless. But the freedom on this side, that's the real empire. I wrote until the sun started to come up over the bay. I wasn't a silent partner anymore. I was the narrator. And I had a lot to say. I looked at my missed calls. There were none. And that was the most beautiful sound of all. The news of Robert's arrest in Florida hit the national headlines on a Tuesday morning. I watched the crawl on the financial news network while sitting in the back of my car, heading toward the office. The mugshot of the man I had once loved looked like a stranger, his skin sallow, and his silver hair, once his pride, now matted and thin. I felt a brief flicker of a headache, the ghost of a 23-year-old trauma, but I pushed it aside as we pulled up to the glass tower. Ms. Hartford, the lawyers from the SEC are in conference room B, Marcus said the moment I stepped off the elevator. I didn't slow down. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, and get Rebecca Martinez on the line. I walked into my office and saw a man standing by the window. It wasn't an SEC agent. It was Robert's brother, Michael. He was the only one in that family who had ever shown me a shred of genuine kindness, but today his face was a mask of grief. "He's asking for bail money, Margaret," Michael said without a greeting. The judge set it at 500,000 US dollars because of the flight risk to the Caymans. Then he should have saved some of the $5 million he stole from me, I replied, setting my briefcase on the table. He says if he stays in there, he won't survive the week. He's having panic attacks. He's calling it a breakdown. He called my awakening a breakdown for months, Michael. Now he's learning the difference between a tragedy and a consequence. Michael looked at the floor. The family can't raise that kind of cash. Sarah already emptied her savings to help him with his first round of legal fees. That was her choice, and this is mine, I said, my voice like tempered steel. I am not a bank for the man who tried to erase me. If he wants out, he can sell his remaining stake in the shell company. Oh, wait. The government seized that this morning. The door clicked shut behind Michael, leaving me in a silence that felt like victory. I moved to the conference room, where the SEC agents were waiting with stacks of wire transfer records. One agent, a woman with sharp eyes, slid a document toward me. We've tracked a final payment from M. Hartford Holdings to a private account in the name of Vanessa Hart, she said. 150,000 US dollars sent the day after you fired her. I looked at the number. It was the exact amount Robert had told me we couldn't afford for our daughter's graduation gift a year ago. The betrayal had layers I was still peeling back. She's cooperating, isn't she? I asked. She gave us the server passwords in exchange for a deferred prosecution agreement, the agent confirmed. She said Robert told her you were incompetent and would notice a few missing zeros. I stood up, my pulse steady. I noticed everything. I just waited for the right moment to act. I left the meeting and walked toward the window overlooking the city. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Please. I'm dying in here. Just one more chance. I didn't block it this time. I deleted it. Some chapters are meant to stay closed, and some men are meant to stay behind the bars they built for themselves. The board of Sterling Enterprises was in a state of high contrast panic by the time the quarterly earnings call approached. I walked into the boardroom, my heels echoing like a countdown on the marble floor. James Morrison, the CFO, looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. The press is calling it the Sterling scandal, James said, his voice cracking. The investors are demanding we distance ourselves from Robert's name entirely. Then we do it, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. Effective noon today, the company is being rebranded as Hartford Global. That will cost millions in marketing, a board member protested. And Robert's name is costing us billions in market cap, I fired back, leaning forward. We've already secured a $10 million credit line to cover the transition. My personal assets are the collateral. The room went silent. They knew I had the leverage. I wasn't just the widow of a reputation. I was the architect of the recovery. I left the office and drove to the county jail. I didn't want to see Robert, but I needed a signature on the final deed transfer for the city apartment. The visiting room smelled of floor wax and old sweat. When Robert was let in, he looked like a broken toy. Margaret, he whispered, pressing his hands against the glass. You look different. I look like myself, Robert. You just never bothered to see me, I said, sliding the papers through the slot. I'll sign them. I'll sign anything. Just get me a better lawyer. Henderson is useless. I'm not your wife anymore, Robert. I'm your creditor, I replied. You sign those papers, and I'll ensure your daughter's tuition is covered for her final year. That's my only offer. His hand shook as he grabbed the pen. You really hate me that much? Hate requires energy, Robert. I'm just indifferent, I said, watching him sign away the last piece of his pride. I walked out of the jail into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. The deed is filed. The apartment is yours. We've also recovered the 400,000 US dollars he spent on Vanessa's jewelry through a clawback provision. Good, I said, sliding into my car. Sell it all. Donate the proceeds to the women's shelter on 4th Street. As I drove away, I saw a tabloid on a newsstand with the headline, Useless Wife Takes the Crown. I laughed, a genuine loud sound that filled the car. The panic was gone. The only thing left was the road ahead. The public launch of Hartford Global was set for the following month, but the social fallout hit sooner. I was invited to the governor's ball, the very same event where Patricia Hoffman had pitied me just a year ago. I walked in alone, the midnight blue silk of my dress flowing around me like a dark tide. Margaret, or should I say, Madam Chair? Patricia approached, her smile tight and desperate. Margaret is fine, Patricia, I said, accepting a glass of water from a server. We were so sorry to hear about, well, everything. It's such a shame about Robert. 23 years and it ends like this. It didn't end, Patricia. It evolved, I said, looking her straight in the eye. And don't be sorry for me. I'm the one who kept the 17 million US dollars and the company. She choked on her champagne and moved away quickly. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Elena, the young founder I had funded. Ms. Hartford, our platform just hit its first 100,000 users, she whispered, her eyes glowing. We're projecting a $2 million profit by Q4. Keep the momentum, Elena. Don't let anyone tell you that you're just the face of the brand, I told her, squeezing her hand. The evening progressed in a blur of power moves and strategic nods. I was no longer the woman behind the success. I was the success. But as I stepped onto the balcony for some air, I saw a familiar face in the shadows. It was Vanessa. She wasn't wearing scarlet tonight. She was wearing a plain gray coat, her face pale and devoid of the ambition that had once defined her. I'm not here to fight, she said, her voice small. I just wanted to tell you. The SEC took everything. My car, my apartment, even the jewelry Robert gave me. You made a bet on a man who was already losing, Vanessa, I said, not moving from the railing. I know. He's writing me letters from jail. He wants me to wait for him. He says we can start over with the money he hid in Sarasota. I turned to her, my voice low. There is no money in Sarasota. I found it 3 days ago and turned it over to the feds. Her face crumbled. She turned and vanished into the crowd, a shadow of a life she never truly owned. I walked back inside, the music swelling as the clock struck midnight. Tomorrow, the new brand would go live. Tomorrow, Robert Sterling would be a footnote in a textbook about corporate greed. My phone vibrated once. A text from David Chen. Wire confirmed. Hartford Global is officially the majority shareholder. I looked at my reflection in the ballroom mirror. I didn't see a wife. I saw a sovereign. 1 year after the collapse of Sterling Enterprises, I sat on the deck of my beach house in Malibu, the very spot where Robert had proposed 24 years ago. The ocean was a deep, rhythmic blue, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for a phone to ring or a contract to sign. Hartford Global was thriving. We had just closed a deal for 50 million US dollars to expand our sustainable tech division. I had stepped back from the day-to-day operations, leaving the company in the hands of the women I had mentored. My maiden name was on the building, but my spirit was here, by the water. My daughter, Chloe, walked out with 2 glasses of iced tea. She had graduated with honors and was starting her own firm in London. Did you hear? She asked, sitting beside me. The sentencing came down this morning. How long? I asked, watching a seagull dip toward the waves. 10 years. No parole for the first 5 because of the wire fraud. I exhaled, a long, slow release of tension I hadn't realized I was still holding. 10 years. He'll be 62 when he gets out. He sent another letter, Mom. He wants you to visit him. He says he has a new business plan for when he's released. I took a sip of the tea, the sweetness sharp against the salt air. Tell the lawyers to return it unopened. He's a ghost now, Chloe, and I don't believe in hauntings. The sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the sand. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old platinum bracelet, the one Jake from security had found on the hotel steps a year ago. I looked at the coordinates of the engagement beach for the last time. With a steady hand, I tossed it into the surf. I watched it catch the light for a second before the Pacific swallowed it whole. "Are you okay?" Chloe asked, touching my arm. "I'm more than okay," I said, leaning back into the chair. "I'm free." The useless wife was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built an empire, dismantled a betrayal, and reclaimed her soul. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves, the only sound in a world that finally belonged to me. I had taken the money, I had taken the power, and I had kept my peace. The panic on the other side, it really was priceless. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.